I never planned to fall for someone half my age. But when I met Liam at the gym, something inside me woke up, something I thought was long gone. It started as a harmless game, just a little thrill to remind myself I was still alive. But what I never expected was how far I'd be willing to go to feel that way again. I had never expected to feel this way again. At 62, with a marriage spanning over 4 decades, I had long settled into a life of quiet companionship. My husband, David, was reliable, steady, a good man in every way that mattered. But love, in its most passionate and consuming form, had faded into something more practical. We existed side by side, bound by shared history rather than genuine connection. Then, one ordinary afternoon, something changed. It started at the gym, a place I had joined out of a sense of obligation rather than enthusiasm. I had read somewhere that staying active helped with aging, so I showed up a few times a week, going through the motions without much thought. That day, however, was different. He caught my attention before I even realized it was happening. There was something about the way he moved, effortless, controlled, exuding a quiet confidence that felt magnetic. He was young, no older than 25, with a presence that filled the space without demanding it. His muscles tensed and flexed as he lifted weights, sweat glistening on his skin under the bright lights. I felt a strange, almost unsettling thrill, a flutter of something I hadn't experienced in years. My first instinct was to dismiss it, to remind myself of who I was, a woman past her prime, someone who had no business indulging in such thoughts. But the more I tried to push it away, the more aware I became of the way my gaze kept drifting toward him. For the first few days, I convinced myself it was nothing more than idle curiosity. After all, people watch each other at the gym all the time. But then I started timing my workouts differently, adjusting my schedule so that I would be there when he was. I told myself it was a coincidence, but deep down, I knew better. The first time I spoke to him, it was casual. A simple comment about his form, something light and nonchalant. But beneath my words was an intention, a curiosity masked as friendliness. I let my fingers brush against his arm, just a brief touch, but one that lingered longer in my mind than it had in reality. He responded politely, his voice smooth and composed. His eyes held no immediate hint of interest, but there was something there, a flicker, a hesitation that made me wonder. It was enough to keep me coming back, to keep testing the boundaries of this unspoken game. As the weeks passed, I became more deliberate. I started choosing outfits that accentuated my figure just enough to be noticed but not enough to be obvious. My hair, once thrown into a careless ponytail, was now styled with a bit more effort. I paid attention to the way I carried myself, the way I smiled, the way I stood just a little closer than necessary when we spoke. He never crossed any lines. His responses remained neutral, never dismissive but never entirely inviting either. Yet, there were moments, fleeting, almost imperceptible shifts in his body language that made me believe he wasn't entirely indifferent. I knew I was playing with fire, that what I was doing was reckless, even absurd. But the thrill of it was intoxicating. For the first time in years, I felt something awaken within me, a reminder that I was still a woman, still capable of desire, still alive. It was never about love. Not yet, at least. It was about the way his presence made me feel, the way he unknowingly pulled me from the monotony of my life and into something that felt new, dangerous, and exciting. And so, I kept watching. Kept waiting. Kept wondering how far I was willing to go. I had never considered myself the type of woman to play games, but here I was, stepping further into something I barely understood. My gym visits became more than just workouts, they turned into carefully orchestrated opportunities. I was learning his schedule, finding excuses to linger near the free weights when he was there, striking up casual conversations that always felt charged with something unspoken. Liam. That was his name. I had overheard it in passing one afternoon when a friend of his called out to him across the gym. It suited him, strong, simple, confident. Unlike me, he belonged here, moving through the space with a kind of ease I envied. He was young, full of energy, and entirely unaware of the way he had appended something deep within me. I started making subtle changes. My usual oversized t-shirts were replaced with fitted tanks, my leggings chosen to highlight the best parts of my figure. I told myself it wasn't about him, that I was simply taking better care of myself, feeling more confident in my skin. But I knew the truth. I was dressing for him. The interactions became more deliberate. A touch on his arm that lingered just a second longer than necessary. A comment about his workout, accompanied by a knowing smile. It was a dance, slow and careful, always towing the line between playful and suggestive. But Liam, he was unreadable. He never pulled away from me, but he never leaned in, either. He would smile, laugh at my jokes, engage in our small talk, but his responses were always measured. He never gave me anything solid to hold on to. And yet, that restraint only made me more determined. It became a kind of challenge, an exhilarating one. I found myself craving his attention, looking forward to the brief but charged moments we shared. There was something thrilling about it, the uncertainty, the push and pull. It was intoxicating, this feeling of being seen again. Then, one afternoon, I decided to push just a little harder. I had just finished a set and was toweling off when I saw him walking toward the water fountain. Timing it perfectly, I made my way over, casually standing beside him as I filled my own bottle. "You always this focused?" I teased, tilting my head toward him. He glanced at me, a smirk flickering across his lips. "Comes with the territory." I let my fingers brush against his forearm as I reached for the bottle, my touch featherlight but intentional. He tensed, just for a moment, but he didn't move away. That was all I needed. That evening, I stood in front of the mirror longer than usual. My heart was racing in a way that had nothing to do with the gym. I had felt something in that moment, something small but unmistakable. A shift. I was getting closer. And I had no plans of stopping. I had told myself it was harmless. Just a bit of fun, a way to feel something again. But the more time I spent around Liam, the harder it became to ignore the growing pull between us. It wasn't just attraction anymore. It was anticipation, an unspoken tension that hummed beneath every glance, every interaction. I started to crave our moments together, the way my heart would race whenever I spotted him at the gym. Even the smallest exchanges felt electric. A brush of our shoulders as we passed each other. The way his eyes would flicker over me, quickly, but never without meaning. At first, I thought I was imagining it. That I was the only one feeling this undercurrent of something more. But the signs were there, subtle, fleeting, but unmistakable. The way he lingered just a little longer when we spoke. The way he sometimes seemed about to say something but stopped himself. And then, one evening, everything changed. It had been a long workout. The gym was quieter than usual, the usual rush of people dwindling as the night wore on. I had just finished my last set, wiping the sweat from my forehead when I noticed Liam approaching. "Good session?" he asked, his voice even, unreadable as always. I nodded, reaching for my water bottle. "Yeah, you?" He shrugged, a hint of a smirk playing at the corner of his lips. "Could have been better." The air between us felt heavier than usual. Maybe it was the way we were standing, closer than normal. Maybe it was the way his gaze lingered, his usual restraint feeling just a little weaker. I took a breath, steadying myself before speaking. "How about a smoothie?" "My treat." For a moment, I thought he'd turn me down. But then, after a beat of silence, he gave a small nod. "Sure." The smoothie bar was nearly empty when we arrived. Soft lighting cast warm shadows over the space, making it feel strangely intimate despite the casual setting. We ordered our drinks, and as we sat down at a small table, I could feel the shift between us. The conversation started light, as it always did. Talk of workouts, weekend plans, meaningless chatter meant to fill the space. But there was something underneath it all, a quiet tension neither of us acknowledged, yet both of us felt. Every movement felt heightened. The way he leaned forward slightly when I spoke, his forearm resting on the table just inches from mine. The way his fingers drummed absently against his glass, as if trying to work out some unspoken thought. At one point, I laughed at something he said, a genuine moment of amusement breaking through the tension. And that's when I saw it, his expression softening, his eyes lingering on me just a little too long. Something had changed. As we stepped outside, the evening air cool against my skin, I took a chance. My hand, seemingly by accident, found his arm again. This time, I let it stay there just a second longer. He didn't move away. Didn't speak. But in the silence, I felt it. A crack in his composure. A moment of hesitation that told me I had finally gotten under his skin. I could sense the conflict in him, the way his body seemed to tense at my touch, the way his gaze shifted slightly, as if searching for an answer he wasn't sure he wanted to find. We stood there for a moment, neither of us saying anything. The city lights flickered in the distance, the hum of passing cars filling the silence between us. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat, anticipation thick in the air. Then, just as quickly as it had happened, he stepped back. Just an inch, barely noticeable to anyone else, but enough for me to feel the retreat. "Thanks for the smoothie," he said, his voice level, controlled. I nodded, masking my disappointment. "Anytime." I watched as he turned and walked away, his movements steady, as if trying to shake off whatever had just happened between us. But I knew. I had felt it. And this wasn't the end. Not by a long shot. I had spent weeks pushing the boundaries, testing his restraint, waiting for that moment when he would finally give in. I had seen the hesitation in his eyes, the way he lingered just a second too long, the way his body tensed under my touch but never moved away. He wasn't indifferent, he was resisting. And that resistance only made me want him more. I wasn't sure when exactly the game had turned into something more. Maybe it was the way my thoughts started revolving around him, the way I would catch myself looking forward to our brief encounters at the gym more than anything else in my day. Maybe it was the way he occupied my mind even when I wasn't there, the way I'd replay our conversations, dissecting every word, every glance, every small shift in his demeanor. And then I did something I had never done before. I invited him over. It was an impulsive decision, one that felt both reckless and inevitable at the same time. My husband, Daniel, was away on one of his frequent business trips, another predictable absence in our predictable life. The house felt too big, too empty, and I needed someone, to fill that space. I kept the invitation casual, under the pretense of dinner. Nothing overt, nothing that could scare him away. Just a meal, a chance to talk outside the gym, outside the carefully controlled environment where we both pretended nothing was happening. But I knew exactly what I was doing. I spent hours preparing, though I told myself it wasn't for him. I chose a dress that hugged my curves just right, let my hair fall in soft waves over my shoulders. The lighting in the house was dim, warm, inviting. Every detail was intentional, even if I refused to admit it to myself. When Liam arrived, I could tell he was surprised. His eyes swept over me quickly before he masked it with his usual composure. But I saw it. That flicker of something he tried to hide. Dinner started off normal enough. We talked about the gym, about work, about things that didn't matter. But the air between us was thick with something unspoken. I watched the way he shifted in his seat, the way his fingers tightened around his glass just slightly when I laughed, the way his gaze would drift back to me even when he tried to focus on something else. After dinner, we moved to the living room. The space was cozy, intimate. I poured us both a glass of wine, settling onto the couch beside him. Not too close, not too far. Just enough. The tension was unbearable. Every word felt heavy, every glance too meaningful. The distance between us felt almost artificial, like something we were both holding onto for the sake of appearances. And then, it happened. His hand brushed against mine as he reached for his drink. It was a simple touch, nothing deliberate, nothing inappropriate. But I felt it. So did he. For a long moment, neither of us moved. The only sound was the quiet hum of the city outside, the occasional clink of ice melting in our glasses. I turned to him, my pulse pounding in my ears. Our eyes met, and in that instant, there were no more excuses. No more pretending. Slowly, deliberately, I let my fingers trail over the back of his hand, light as a whisper. He didn't pull away. Didn't speak. But his breathing changed, just slightly. I shifted closer, feeling the warmth of his body against mine, my skin prickling with anticipation. It was a moment of silent surrender, of something breaking between us, something neither of us could take back. And when I leaned in, when my lips finally met his, it was like everything I had been waiting for had finally come crashing down. There was no hesitation this time. No measured responses, no careful restraint. Just want. Just need. And neither of us stopped it. I had crossed the line. There was no undoing it, no pretending it hadn't happened. What started as a game, a way to feel something again, had become something far more complicated. Liam and I didn't talk about that night. We didn't need to. The silence between us carried the weight of what we had done, what we had become. And yet, despite the guilt that gnawed at the edges of my mind, I couldn't bring myself to stop. The affair became a routine, slipping seamlessly into the life I had built with Daniel. The deception came easier than I had expected. I told myself that I wasn't hurting him, that our marriage had been over long before Liam ever entered the picture. And maybe that was true. But the weight of my double life grew heavier with each passing day. Liam was different now. More confident. More assertive. He no longer hesitated in my presence, no longer second-guessed his desire for me. And that change only made me want him more. We stole moments wherever we could. My house, when Daniel was away. Secluded corners of the city, places where no one would question a lingering touch, a stolen glance. The secrecy made it intoxicating, each encounter laced with both excitement and danger. But it wasn't just the physical connection. That was what scared me the most. Somewhere along the way, the affair had stopped being about desire. Liam started asking questions. Real ones. About my life, my marriage, my happiness. He wanted to understand why I had stayed in a relationship that had long since lost its spark. He wanted to know if I had ever considered leaving. And I didn't have an answer. For the first time, I was forced to face the reality of what I had done. This wasn't just a secret indulgence anymore. Liam had become more than an escape. He had become real. One evening, as we sat together in a quiet park, his hand warm in mine, he turned to me with an expression I had never seen before, serious, searching. "I can't keep doing this," he said, his voice low but firm. I felt my stomach drop. "What do you mean?" He exhaled, looking away for a moment before meeting my gaze again. "I don't want to be someone you meet in the shadows. I don't want to be a secret." I swallowed hard, my heart pounding. I had known this moment would come, but I hadn't been ready for it. "I don't know if I can leave," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. Liam studied me for a long moment before nodding slowly. "Then I need to walk away." The words hit me like a physical blow. I had thought I could control this, that I could keep everything separate. But Liam wasn't just a fleeting distraction anymore. He was something I couldn't ignore. I went home that night and lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling. My mind was a storm of conflicting emotions, guilt, fear, longing. Could I really leave Daniel? Could I risk everything for something that felt so uncertain? And then, for the first time in years, I allowed myself to be honest. I had been lying to myself as much as I had been lying to my husband. The truth was, my marriage had ended long before Liam ever entered my life. I had been clinging to a past that no longer existed, afraid of what it would mean to let go. The next morning, I made my decision. It wasn't easy. Telling Daniel the truth was one of the hardest things I had ever done. He was hurt, angry, but deep down, he knew. He had seen the distance between us, the slow unraveling of what we had once been. Leaving was painful, but staying would have been worse. Liam and I didn't rush into anything. We took our time, allowing ourselves to navigate this new reality without the weight of secrecy. There were challenges, doubts, but there was also something else, something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was living. And no matter what happened next, I knew one thing for certain. I would never go back.